The heavy scent of smoke filled the penthouse as the bespoke parchment of her divorce papers curled into black ash. He didn't yell. He just watched the flames die, stepped into her space, bare inches from her trembling lips, and whispered, "Did you really think a piece of paper could save you from me?" Penelope stared at the thick stack of legal documents resting on the cold Calcutta marble island of the kitchen. The papers were printed on heavy Crane and Cotul stock, the crisp black ink detailing the dissolution of a marriage that to the outside world was practically royalty. But this wasn't a fairy tale. It was a hostage situation, wrapped in Ermenegildo Zegna silk and paid for in blood money. At £240, Penelope was a stark contrast to the world she had been thrust into. In the ruthless, hyper-glamorous sphere of the New York syndicate, the wives and mistresses were expected to look like they had just walked off a Milan runway, gaunt, angular, and surgically perfected. Penelope was none of those things. She was a big woman, unapologetically fat, with a soft, round belly, thick thighs, and heavy, lush curves that she wrapped in custom Marina Rinaldi silk. Before Dominic, she had been comfortable in her own skin, running a wildly successful artisanal bakery in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. She had been loud, happy, and vibrant. Now, standing in the silence of the $30 million Tribeca triplex, she felt entirely invisible. She picked up the Mont Blanc fountain pen, its gold weight heavy in her trembling fingers. For 3 years, she had been the wife of Dominic Castellano, the undisputed head of the Castellano crime family. For 3 years, she had endured the side eyes, the muffled snickers at Cipriani galas, and the cruel whispers in the powder rooms of the Baccarat Hotel. "Why her?" they would murmur, their voices dripping with venom. "Look at the size of her. She must have caught him in a spell. A man like Dominic could have a Victoria's Secret model." And he married the baker. Penelope could have handled the whispers if Dominic had ever stood by her side and held her hand. But Dominic was a phantom. He was a man made of ice and violence, operating in a world of shadows that excluded her entirely. Over the last 6 months, he had grown even more distant. He would come home at 4 in the morning, smelling of expensive Tom Ford oud wood, stale cigar smoke, and metallic copper, the unmistakable scent of fresh blood. He barely looked at her. When he did, his dark eyes were unreadable. His jaw clenched so tight it looked carved from granite. The final straw had broken 2 weeks ago. Penelope had seen the photographs slipped under the penthouse door in a manila envelope. Pictures of Dominic walking out of the Carlisle Hotel in the dead of night, a beautiful, slender blonde clinging to his arm. The woman was everything Penelope was not: petite, fragile-looking, and conventionally flawless. Penelope had spent 3 days crying into her pillow, feeling the deep, familiar ache of inadequacy hollow out her chest. She had looked at her soft body in the floor-to-ceiling mirrors of her dressing room, tracing the stretch marks on her hips with a tear-stained cheek, feeling a profound wave of self-loathing that Dominic's coldness had nurtured. She was done. She refused to be the naive, oversized wife sitting in a glass tower while her husband paraded his beautiful mistress around the Upper East Side. She had hired Laura Wasser. It cost a small fortune, a retainer she paid entirely from the hidden offshore account she had built from her bakery's buyout. But she needed a shark. Wasser's team had drawn up the papers quietly, circumventing the Castellano family's usual legal watchdogs. Penelope signed her name on the dotted line. Penelope Rose Hayes. She didn't even use his last name. She dropped the pen. The sound echoed in the cavernous, empty kitchen. She had packed 2 vintage Louis Vuitton steamer trunks, currently waiting by the private elevator. A town car was idling down on Greenwich Street, ready to take her to Teterboro Airport, where a chartered jet was waiting to fly her to a quiet, anonymous life in the French countryside. "Going somewhere, Penny?" The voice was a low, gravelly rumble that sent a violent shockwave down Penelope's spine. She whipped around. Dominic was standing in the archway of the kitchen. He was supposed to be in Chicago for a sit-down with the outfit. He wasn't supposed to be back until Friday. Yet here he was, looking like a terrifying fallen angel in a bespoke charcoal 3-piece suit that hugged his broad, muscular frame. His tie was loosened, his thick, dark hair slightly disheveled, and his knuckles. Penelope's breath hitched. His knuckles were bruised and split, a faint smear of crimson staining his white French cuff. "Dominic," she breathed, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. He didn't say a word. He walked into the kitchen with the slow, predatory grace of an apex predator cornering its prey. The sheer physical presence of the man swallowed the room. He was 6'3" of coiled violence and ruthless power, a man who could end a life with a single nod. His dark, heavy-lidded eyes bypassed her completely and landed on the marble island. On the heavy parchment papers, on the signature at the bottom. The silence in the penthouse became suffocating. It was a heavy, physical thing, pressing down on Penelope's chest until she felt like she couldn't pull air into her lungs. She waited for the explosion. She waited for the Sicilian temper that was legendary on the streets of New York, the fury that had leveled entire rival factions. Instead, Dominic simply reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. Penelope took a step back, her back hitting the edge of the marble counter. Her pulse roared in her ears. Was he reaching for his weapon? Dominic pulled out a heavy, vintage 1941 replica gold Zippo lighter. He flipped the top open with a sharp, metallic clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. "Laura Wasser." Dominic read upside down, his voice dangerously soft. It was a tone he used right before a very bad thing happened to someone. "You hired the Bulldog of Hollywood to divorce a Castellano. I have to admit, Penny, the sheer audacity of it is almost impressive. It took my guys 3 days to hack her encrypted servers to figure out what you were doing." "You knew?" Penelope whispered, her voice shaking. "Of course I knew," Dominic murmured, striking the flint. A bright, steady orange flame sprang to life, illuminating the sharp, ruthless angles of his face. "You think a single piece of paper gets filed in this city without my name attached to it? You think you can charter a jet out of Teterboro without my head of security clearing the flight path?" He picked up the stack of divorce papers with his left hand. "Dominic, don't," Penelope said, trying to summon the anger that had fueled her all morning. She forced herself to stand tall, refusing to shrink, refusing to apologize for the space she took up. "I'm leaving. You can't keep me here. I won't be your joke anymore. I won't be the pathetic, fat wife you keep locked in a penthouse while you spend your nights at the Carlisle with her." Dominic froze. The flame of the lighter flickered. He slowly raised his eyes to meet hers, and the raw, unadulterated darkness in them made Penelope's breath catch. "The joke?" he repeated, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating with a suppressed, lethal energy. He touched the flame of the Zippo to the corner of the heavy Crane and Coty paper. "Dominic, stop!" Penelope lunged forward, but he easily caught her wrist with his bruised hand, his grip like a steel vice. It wasn't tight enough to hurt, but it was absolute, immovable. They both watched as the flame caught. The high-quality paper curled, turning a brilliant, angry orange before disintegrating into fragile black ash. Dominic held the burning stack over the marble sink, letting the embers drift down until the heat licked his fingertips. Only then did he drop the flaming remnants, turning on the gold faucet to wash the ashes down the drain. In less than 10 seconds, Laura Wasser's $300,000 legal masterpiece was nothing but soot. Dominic snapped the Zippo shut and placed it on the counter. He turned to Penelope, crowding her against the island, trapping her between the cold stone and the solid heat-radiating wall of his chest. "You're not leaving me," he whispered, his lips mere inches from hers. The scent of him, blood, expensive cologne, and dark, masculine heat, enveloped her entirely. "You burned them," she cried, a tear finally spilling over her lashes, furious and humiliated. "It doesn't matter. I'll print them again. I'll go to the police, Dominic, I swear to God." "Go ahead," he interrupted smoothly, reaching up to cup her jaw. His thumb, rough and calloused, wiped away the tear. "Tell the NYPD that your husband refused to let you go. See how far that gets you in a city I own. But before you run, Penelope, you are going to listen to me." She tried to turn her head away, but he held her firmly, forcing her to look into his eyes. "You think you're a joke?" Dominic's voice was rough, almost frantic now, the icy facade finally cracking. "You think I keep you up here because I'm ashamed of you? Do you have any idea what I've been doing for the last 6 months, Penny? Do you?" "Sleeping with a blonde socialite," Penelope spat out, her chest heaving, the soft curves of her breasts pressing against his suit as she breathed. Dominic let out a harsh, bitter laugh. "A blonde socialite? You mean Caterina Rossi, the daughter of the Chicago outfit's underboss?" Penelope blinked, confused. "I don't care who she is. I saw the pictures, Dominic. I saw you leaving the hotel. Did you see the pictures of what I left inside that hotel room?" Dominic sneered, his eyes flashing with a terrifying primal violence. "Caterina Rossi came to New York to broker a peace treaty. But 6 months ago, at the Baccarat Hotel, Caterina made a comment in the powder room. She called my wife a derogatory name. She laughed at your weight, Penny. She told the other wives that I must be keeping you around as a human shield." Penelope's stomach plummeted. The air left her lungs. That was the night she had run to the bathroom crying, hearing the women laughing, though she hadn't known exactly who said it. "I found out," Dominic continued, his voice dropping to a low, deadly purr. "And I don't let anyone disrespect my queen. Not my capos, not the rival families, and sure as hell not a spoiled Mafia princess from Chicago." "Dominic," Penelope whispered, her eyes wide as the horrifying reality of his words began to sink in. "I didn't sleep with her, Penelope," he said softly, tracing the soft, full curve of her bottom lip with his thumb. "I spent the last 6 months systematically dismantling her father's empire from the inside out. I bankrupted their casinos. I bought out their shipping lines. And last night, at the Carlisle, I delivered a message. Let's just say Caterina Rossi will be drinking her meals through a straw for the next year, and her father no longer holds a seat at the commission." Penelope stared at him, horrified and mesmerized. You started a mob war. Over a comment? I started a war over you, he corrected fiercely, his hands sliding down her back, gripping her thick, lush hips and pulling her flush against his hard body. I destroyed a 50-year-old syndicate because a woman insulted the body I worship. I kept you isolated because there were hits out on me, Penny. They were trying to get to me through you. Every night I came home late. Every night I was covered in blood. I was butchering the men who were trying to put a bullet in your beautiful head. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply, his broad shoulders trembling slightly. It was the most vulnerable she had ever seen, the Don of the Castellano family. You think I want skin and bones? He muttered against her collarbone, his large hands squeezing her waist, dragging his palms over the soft swell of her stomach, reverent and possessive. I chose you, Penelope, not because of your bakery, not for a front. I walked into that shop 3 years ago, saw you covered in flour, laughing, looking so soft and warm and real, and I knew you were mine. I crave every inch of you. Your softness is the only peace I have in this brutal fucking life. Penelope's hands tentatively came up to rest on his chest. She could feel the wild, erratic thumping of his heart beneath the silk vest. The pictures, she started, her mind spinning. Sent by the Chicago crew to try and tear us apart, Dominic stated, lifting his head to meet her gaze. They couldn't kill me physically, so they tried to destroy the only thing that keeps me breathing. They knew your insecurities, Penny. They weaponized them against you. He stepped back just enough to look her full in the face, his dark eyes burning with an obsessive, relentless fire. There is no divorce, Dominic commanded softly, the words ringing with finality. There is no French countryside. You are Penelope Castellano. You are my wife. You are the only woman I will ever touch, the only woman I will ever want. If you try to run, I will hunt you down. If you try to hide, I will burn the world to the ground to find you. Do you understand me? Penelope looked at the sink, where the black ashes of her freedom were slowly washing down the drain. She looked back at the bruised, bloody, terrifying man who loved her with a darkness that was both suffocating and intoxicating. She realized then that she was never a hostage to her weight or to the cruel whispers of the high society women. She was a hostage to him. And as his hands tangled in her hair, pulling her up for a bruising, desperate kiss that tasted of expensive whiskey and absolute surrender, a terrifying thought crossed Penelope's mind. She didn't want to be rescued. Penelope did not pull away from the bruising, desperate kiss. Instead, she let the consuming darkness of Dominic's chaotic world swallow her whole. The fragile black ashes in the marble sink were entirely gone, washed away into the sprawling plumbing of Manhattan, and with them went the naive, insecure baker from Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. The woman who had cried in the powder rooms over cruel whispers was dead. If she was going to be chained indefinitely to the devil himself, she was strictly going to wear the heavy, blood-soaked crown he was eagerly offering her. No more shadows, Penelope whispered fiercely against his lips, her plump, soft hands sliding up the expensive silk lapels of his charcoal suit, gripping the fabric with a newfound, terrifying strength. If I am your wife, Dominic, you do not hide me. You do not lock me in a $30 million ivory tower and fight my battles in the dark alleys of this city. I want to see the blood. I want them to see me. Every single person who ever looked down on me. Dominic pulled back just an inch, his dark, heavy-lidded eyes widening in absolute shock before a wicked, impossibly proud grin slowly spread across his handsome, bruised face. It was a terrifying smile, a smile that routinely made hardened, violent criminals drop to their trembling knees, but for Penelope, it was a devoted, unbreakable promise. "Whatever my queen demands," Dominic murmured, his calloused, bloody thumb gently brushing her swollen lower lip with obsessive reverence. The 5 families are hosting their annual syndicate summit at the Pierre tonight. It was originally supposed to be a very quiet, highly tense gathering to address the sudden collapse of the Rossi Empire in Chicago. We will attend, and my beautiful wife, we will make our entrance absolutely deafening. 4 hours later, Penelope stood before the towering, floor-to-ceiling mirrors of her expansive dressing room. She was not trying to hide her body. She was weaponizing it. She was wearing a custom, breathtaking gown designed exclusively by Christian Siriano. The heavy, luxurious velvet was the exact, deep shade of freshly spilled arterial blood. The daring cut plunged sharply down her chest, unapologetically highlighting her heavy, lush breasts, while the bodice was corseted tightly, cinching her waist before flaring out dramatically over her wide, thick hips and soft, round stomach. A spectacular slit ran up her heavy thigh, revealing skin and the strap of a hidden, leather thigh holster Dominic had personally strapped to her leg. She was a massive, magnificent monument of a woman, a Rubenesque goddess wrapped in millions of dollars of velvet and diamonds. Around her neck rested the legendary Castellano collar, a cascading waterfall of flawless, brilliantly cut rubies and VVS diamonds that had belonged to Dominic's ruthless grandmother. When Penelope finally emerged from the dressing room and stepped into the grand foyer, Dominic stopped dead in his tracks. The undisputed king of the New York underworld looked entirely paralyzed. His dark eyes devoured every single glorious inch of her thick, unapologetic curves, his breathing growing visibly ragged. He stepped forward, taking her soft, manicured hand, and kissed her knuckles with a desperate, burning loyalty. "You are going to bring the entire East Coast to its knees tonight," Dominic whispered, his voice incredibly hoarse, vibrating with possessive pride. The arrival at the Pierre on Fifth Avenue was a spectacle of calculated intimidation. A fleet of 6 armored black Maybachs pulled up to the heavily guarded private entrance. When Dominic stepped out, adjusting his crisp black tuxedo, the tension in the humid New York air instantly thickened. But when he reached back into the plush leather interior and helped Penelope step onto the pavement, the surrounding crowd of mob enforcers, capos, and highly paid lookouts visibly froze. This was not the quiet, easily humiliated woman they vaguely remembered. This was a force of nature. They entered the grand ballroom, arm in arm. The massive room was dripping in excessive gold leaf, glittering crystal chandeliers, and the absolute worst people the American criminal underworld had to offer. The moment the heavy oak doors swung open and the Castellanos stepped inside, the low hum of dangerous conversation completely flatlined. Penelope kept her head held impossibly high, her posture immaculate. She could feel the immediate, burning stares of 100 ruthless men and their surgically enhanced, painfully thin wives. But this time, Penelope did not shrink. She leaned heavily into her curves, letting the blood-red velvet drape magnificently over her fat, gorgeous body. She felt the heavy, comforting weight of the rubies against her collarbone, and the cold, reassuring steel of the small, loaded Beretta strapped securely to her thigh. Dominic did not leave her side for a single second. He paraded her through the room with a lethal, warning glare that silently dared any man or woman to breathe incorrectly in her general direction. He introduced her to the heads of the Lucchese and the Genovese families, his large hand resting firmly and possessively on the curve of her wide hip, squeezing her lush flesh affectionately in front of the most dangerous men in the country. "Your wife looks remarkably vibrant tonight, Dominic," muttered Lorenzo Vitti, a gaunt, terrifying boss from Brooklyn, his eyes lingering nervously on Penelope's imposing, regal figure. "My wife is the absolute center of my universe, Lorenzo," Dominic replied smoothly, though his voice carried a sharp, thinly veiled threat that echoed loudly over the clinking champagne glasses. "And anyone who forgets to properly respect the center of my universe will find themselves permanently removed from it. Isn't that right, Penny?" "Absolutely, darling," Penelope purred, taking a slow, confident sip of her vintage Dom Perignon. But as the night stretched on, a strange, suffocating tension began to ripple through the velvet-draped corners of the grand ballroom. Penelope, newly hyper-aware of the violent ecosystem she had finally embraced, noticed the subtle shifting of the armed guards near the kitchen exits. The Chicago outfit was supposed to be completely decimated. Caterina Rossi was sipping meals through a straw, and her father was in hiding. But a wounded, dying animal is always the most unpredictable. Dominic was pulled aside by his heavily armed underboss for what was supposed to be a 30-second emergency briefing regarding a shipment at the docks. He kissed Penelope's temple, promised to be right back, and stepped just a few feet away behind a marble pillar, his eyes never truly leaving her. It was in that exact, fleeting moment of vulnerability that the shadows of the ballroom seemingly detached themselves. A man in a stolen waiter's uniform smoothly intercepted Penelope's path as she walked gracefully toward the secluded, dimly lit VIP lounge area. I was tall, his eyes wildly bloodshot, carrying a silver tray of champagne flutes with trembling hands. Penelope recognized the sharp, distinctly northern Italian bone structure immediately. It was Matteo Rossi, Caterina's older brother, the exiled heir to the slaughtered Chicago empire. Before Penelope could even attempt to signal Dominic, Matteo dropped the heavy silver tray. The deafening crash of shattering crystal echoed sharply, instantly drawing the attention of the surrounding enforcers. But Matteo was incredibly fast. He lunged aggressively forward, a highly polished, serrated ceramic blade, invisible to the hotel's metal detectors, suddenly appearing in his clenched fist. He didn't aim for Dominic. He aimed directly for the heart of the Castellano Empire. He aimed for Penelope. "This is for Chicago, you fat, miserable bitch!" Matteo hissed venomously, thrusting the deadly ceramic blade straight toward Penelope's velvet-clad abdomen. Time seemed to slow to a terrifying, absolute crawl. The old Penelope would have undoubtedly frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror. She would have screamed, closed her eyes, and waited for her ruthless husband to miraculously save her. But the woman standing in the Baccarat lounge was forged in the fiery ashes of a burned divorce decree. She was a woman who kneaded thick, heavy dough for hours before dawn. A woman with formidable physical strength hidden beneath her soft, voluptuous curves. Penelope did not scream. She brutally pivoted on her expensive Christian Louboutin stiletto, using her significant, powerful body weight and the heavy, unstoppable momentum of her wide hips. She slammed her shoulder squarely into Matteo's narrow chest. The sheer, unexpected force of a 240-pound woman hitting him with the precise velocity of a freight train sent the Chicago air violently stumbling backward, gasping for air as his ribs audibly cracked under the heavy impact. The serrated ceramic blade slashed wildly through the empty air, completely missing Penelope's body, cleanly slicing through only the outer layer of her luxurious blood-red velvet skirt. Before Matteo could even attempt to recover his footing and strike again, Penelope effortlessly reached down her thick thigh. The daring slit in her dress parted beautifully. Her soft, manicured fingers instantly found the cold, familiar grip of the beretta Dominic had secured there. She unholstered the weapon with a smooth, terrifying grace, raising it in a perfectly level two-handed grip she had learned years ago at a Brooklyn shooting range. Without a single ounce of hesitation, Penelope squeezed the heavy metal trigger. Crack! The suppressed gunshot was relatively quiet, but the devastating result was instantaneous. The bullet struck Matteo Rossi precisely in the kneecap. The Chicago air let out a blood-curdling, agonizing scream, collapsing instantly onto the expensive Persian rug, the ceramic knife clattering harmlessly away across the polished marble floor. The entire grand ballroom descended into absolute, paralyzing chaos. Women shrieked in horror. Capos instantly drew their concealed weapons, and the heavy crystal chandeliers seemed to rattle violently from the sudden explosion of lethal violence. Through the massive sea of panicking bodies, Dominic Castellano tore through the crowded room like a terrifying, vengeful demon unleashed from hell itself. His eyes were entirely black with uncontrollable, murderous rage, his own customized weapon, drawn and ready to slaughter everyone in the room to get to his wife. He violently shoved a table aside, skidding to a halt in the center of the VIP lounge. His chest was heaving with panic. But he did not find his wife bleeding out on the floor. Instead, Dominic found Penelope Castellano standing incredibly tall, an absolute vision of terrifying, majestic wrath in her partially torn red velvet gown. She was breathing heavily, her lush breasts rising and falling rapidly, her soft face perfectly flushed with adrenaline. She held the smoking beretta steadily, aimed directly at the whimpering, bleeding man violently sobbing at her expensive heels. Dominic stared at his wife, the panic rapidly draining from his aggressive posture, completely replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of dark, absolute worship. He slowly walked over to Matteo Rossi, stepping ruthlessly on the man's wounded leg, earning another pathetic, agonizing scream. But Dominic never looked down at his victim. His burning, obsessive eyes remained entirely fixed on Penelope. "You handled this beautifully, Mia Regina," Dominic purred softly, a dark, incredibly proud smirk playing on his lips. He gently reached out, placing his large, warm hand over her smaller ones, carefully lowering the barrel of her weapon. "Allow me to handle the trash for you." Penelope looked deeply into her husband's eyes, her pulse roaring delightfully in her ears. She felt more alive, more incredibly powerful in her large, magnificent body than she ever had in her entire life. She smiled, a wicked, beautiful expression that perfectly matched his own. "Clean it up, Dominic," Penelope ordered smoothly, her voice completely devoid of any trembling or fear. She turned gracefully on her heel, her heavy, gorgeous curves swishing proudly. "My champagne glass is entirely empty." as the Castellano enforcers swiftly dragged the violently sobbing Matteo out the heavily guarded back exit to a very permanent, very brutal end. Dominic quickly followed his stunning wife to the private bar. The entire syndicate watched in sheer, unadulterated awe and absolute terror. The rumors would spread violently through the criminal underworld by morning. Dominic Castellano was not merely protecting a weak, insecure liability. He was proudly unleashing a terrifying, unstoppable queen. They stood alone near the sweeping balcony, overlooking the glittering, sprawling skyline of Manhattan. Dominic wrapped his large, muscular arms tightly around her thick waist, burying his face in her dark hair, breathing in her sweet scent mixed perfectly with the sharp, metallic tang of gunpowder. "You are absolutely glorious," he whispered intensely against her skin, kissing the heavy, soft curve of her neck. "They will speak of tonight for decades, Penny. You are never, ever escaping me now." Penelope leaned entirely back into his hard, comforting chest. Finally, truly at peace with the beautiful monster she had married and the beautiful monster she had inherently become. "I wouldn't dream of it, my love," she murmured softly, watching the city lights burn. After all, someone has to help you properly run New York. Did Penelope's dark transformation leave you speechless? This is just the beginning of her reign as the most ruthless mafia queen in New York City. If you loved this intense, twist-filled romance, hit that like button and share this video with your fellow drama lovers. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a thrilling chapter of our original stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have stayed with Dominic? See you next time, friends.